بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وآدم ونوح وإبراهيم وموسى وعيسى وما بينهم من النبيين والمرسلين صلوات الله وسلامه عليهم أجمعين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وآدم ونوح وإبراهيم وموسى وعيسى وما بينهم من النبيين والمرسلين صلوات الله وسلامه عليهم أجمعين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وآدم ونوح وإبراهيم وموسى وعيسى وما بينهم من النبيين والمرسلين صلوات الله وسلامه عليهم أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Asalaamu Alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah wa shukrillah. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessings that we're experiencing. We ask Him to grant us tawfiq and blessings in our endeavors, inshallah, and particularly in this endeavor of learning about the best of creation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his blessed family. So we were in the section of the Ummahatul Mu'mineen, the mothers of the believers, and we discussed 5 of the 11. Allah be pleased with them all. And so we left off on line 113, in which the author Imam Lamti says, وَبِنْتُ جَحْشٍ بِنْتُ عَمَّةِ الرَّسُولِ زَوَّجَهَا الرَّحْمَنُ بَارِئُ الْعُقُولِ. Another wife is Bint Jahsh, the daughter of the Messenger's paternal aunt. The Merciful himself, Ar-Rahman, the creator of reason, Bari'ul Uqul, married her. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself conducted the marriage, right? That it was the revelation, Allah ta'ala revealed the verse, and in it He said that we marry her to you. We marry her to you. And so this was done from Ar-Rahman himself subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says in 114, خَيْرَ نَبِيٍّ إِذَا قَضَى مِنْهَا الْوَطَرِ, to the best prophet. So the Merciful himself married her to the best prophet after Zaid had run his course with her. زَيْدٌ وَمَاتَتْ فِي خِلَافَةِ عُمَرَ, and she died during the caliphate of Umar. إِذْ فُتِحَتْ مِصْرُ, when Egypt was conquered. وَكَانَتْ أَطْوَلَ نِسَائِهِ يَدًا كَمَا قَدْ نُقِلَ, and she was the most open-handed in her generosity, as has been narrated. So Zainab bint Jahsh is the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, and she was previously married to Zaid ibn Haritha, okay, the eminent companion who is called Hibbu Rasulillah, the very beloved of the Prophet, of the Messenger ﷺ, and his son, of course, is Usama bin Zaid from Baraka Ayman, and Usama is called Hibbu Hib Rasulillah, the beloved of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. And we know in the seerah that Zaid ibn Haritha, when he was a young boy, he was taken captive unjustly, kidnapped, and then eventually wound up in Mecca, and that in the possession of the Prophet ﷺ after his marriage to Khadija. And so then his family finally caught up with him. His father and uncle found him, and they offered to pay for his freedom. And the Prophet ﷺ said, I give him the choice. He can choose to go back with you. He can choose whatever he wants. And Zayd said that I cannot choose anything but to remain with this man, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is before Islam. And so the Prophet frees him and says that Zayd ibni, or kama qal, Zayd is my son. And so he proclaimed the adoption of Zayd as the son of the Prophet ﷺ. And so from then on he was called Zayd ibn Muhammad. Zayd ibn Muhammad. So then the Prophet ﷺ, originally that he married, he had Zainab bint Jahsh, his cousin, arranged as the wife of Zayd at that time Ibn Muhammad. Okay, and she was reluctant because she was from a very noble family, and Zayd was not his lineal origin, but she went ahead and did so out of obedience to the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, and their marriage there were difficulties in their marriage. Okay, there was some lack of harmony just because of the different social backgrounds and differences in culture. Bismillah. So Zaid used to complain to the Prophet ﷺ and say that, this marriage is difficult, it's not working out. And the Prophet ﷺ would say, Amsik alayka zawjak wattaqillah. And he would say, keep your wife and fear Allah. Keep your wife and fear Allah. Keep your wife and fear Allah, repeatedly every time that Zayd came with that complaint. So finally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed an important ayah from Surah Al-Ahzab. And in this ayah, two major things occurred. One is that the adoption was nullified. Okay, so the ascription of lineage. So adoption meaning the ascription of lineage to someone that is not one's real father. Okay, this is what was annulled. So the idea of caretaking for a child that's not one's blood child, this is still there in Islam. Okay, one could quote unquote adopt someone, bring them into the house, and caretake for someone who's the lineal child of someone else, but they have to keep their parents' names. They have to keep their family or familial ascription. The nasab must be preserved. It's one of the maqasid of the sacred law. So from then on, after the ayah, he went back to being called Zaid ibn al-Haritha. Okay, back to the ascription to his real father. And then the second major thing of the ayah is that Zainab was wedded to our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the ayah says, إِذْ تَقُولُ لِلَّذِي أَنَمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَأَنْعَمْتَ عَلَيْهِ أَمْسِكْ عَلَيْكَ زَوْجَكَ وَاتَّقِ اللَّهِ. When you said to the one that Allah blessed him and you blessed him. Okay, who's the one that Allah blessed and the Prophet blessed sallallahu alaihi wasallam is Zaid. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed Sayyidina Zaid. He's one of the most eminent companions and very, very high ranking and very close to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was always put in charge whenever an expedition was set out. He was the one put in charge, and that also we can understand why Osama, his son, was put in charge of that last expedition before the Prophet passed sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that even Sayyidina Abu Bakr kept that, even though when he was Khalifa, he kept Osama, the young 17-year-old general. He kept him as general, and he himself was under him in that expedition. And we know the famous story, the Battle of Mu'tah, in which Zayd and Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib and then Abdullah ibn Rawaha, each of the three fell. Each of the three were appointed to hold the standard, the flag, and then one after another they fell until Khalid ibn Walid took it, and then he did not fall. And the Prophet ﷺ was sitting in Medina describing that as it was happening. Allah Ta'ala showed it to him, and there was tears flowing in the eyes when he said that Zayd has fallen, Ja'far has fallen, Abdullah ibn Rawaha has fallen. So Zayd was very beloved to the Prophet ﷺ, extremely beloved, very close to him. He was akin to a son, and so Allah Ta'ala says, when you said to the one that Allah blessed him and you blessed him, the Prophet ﷺ, of course, took care of him. Amsik alayka zawjak wattaqillah, quoting what the Prophet would tell him, keep your wife and fear Allah. وَتُخْفِي فِي نَفْسِكَ مَا اللَّهُ مُبْدِيهِ. And you, Allah Ta'ala is telling the Prophet ﷺ, and you kept hidden in your soul what Allah would reveal. You kept hidden in your soul what Allah would reveal. وَتَخْشَى النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ أَحَقُّ أَن تَخْشَى. And you literally you feared people, but the commentators mention what this means, that it's a type of shyness in front of people, while Allah has more right that you should have this shyness or fear. فَلَمَّا قَضَى زَيْدٌ مِنْهَا وَطَرًا. So then when Zayd performed the necessity, the formality, which was the divorce, زَوَّجْنَاكَهَا, we married her to you. Allah Ta'ala says, we married her to you. That was the nikah. There was no formal zawajtuki tazawwaj, the offer and acceptance after this ayah. Allah Ta'ala himself, subhanahu wa ta'ala, conducted the nikah through revelation. We married her to you. لِكَيْ لَا يَكُونَ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ حَرَجٌ فِي أَزْوَاجِ أَدْعِيَائِهِمْ, with the consequence that the believers would have no sin or undue burden with respect to the wives of their adopted sons. Okay, with the consequence, so here's the legislative consequence, here's the legislative significance of this, is that there is no sin or blame or, social discomfort from marrying the former wife of one's ad'iya, the adopted son. إِذَا قَضَوْا مِنْهُنَّ وَطْرًا, once that the adopted son would have divorced that wife, right? So in Jahiliyyah, an adopted son was fully equivalent to a normal son. And so it was a major stigma, completely unheard of, that a man would marry the former wife of an adopted son. It's no different than marrying the former wife of one's real son, which was unheard of. And so Allah Ta'ala annuls this. Okay, He annuls this, and He, subhanahu wa ta'ala, preserves lineage in its fullest by annulling adoption, the claiming of lineage through adoption, and the most emphatic way, not only through revealing a ruling by speech, but actually having an action of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, so not only revealing that there's no reality to adoption in terms of lineage, but actually that the prophetic action breaks it by the Prophet ﷺ marrying Zainab Bint Jahsh. Okay, and this is what Allah Ta'ala Himself says, that زَوَّجْنَاكَهَا, we married her to you, لِكَيْ, with the direct consequence. It's often translated as in order to, but with Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, when this lam is used, our theologians will say it's lam al-aqiba. It's the lam of consequence, not motive, because Allah Ta'ala is transcendent above motives. So this is helpful when reading the Quran, when Allah Ta'ala ascribes an action to Himself, that Allah does this or we did this, and then it says the lam, which often we translate as ta'lil, in order to, for the reason of, that our theologians will say that af'alullah la tu'allal, the actions of God are not based off of motivation, that Allah Ta'ala does not work out of motives like we do. Like, for example, I reached for this water. What moves me to drink it is my thirst. Okay, so that's a motive that I have. It's a gharad. I'm moved, I'm pushed by this motivation to do this action. Nothing pushes Allah. Allah is transcendent above motives. Allah is transcendent above any sort of, inciting factor. And so what they'll say is that Allah Ta'ala does action and then He creates consequences that reflect wisdom. Okay, so rather than something moving Allah, Allah is the one who moves everything. He creates both action and beneficial consequence. And so this is just a small note that لِكَيْ لَا يَكُونَ. So what was the beneficial consequence of the marriage between the Prophet ﷺ and Zainab bint Jahsh? So that there's no sin whatsoever, and no blame and no discomfort with respect to the wives of adopted sons, once those sons have fulfilled that necessity of divorce. وَكَانَ أَمْرُ اللَّهِ مَفْعُولًا. The ayah ends, and the matter of God, the command of God, is certainly fulfilled. When Allah decides something, it's certainly fulfilled. Now, there are certain narrations, okay, that you find in the seerah, in the original sources, and even in some of the works of tafsir, the early tafasir, that according to which the Prophet ﷺ saw Zainab while she's married to Zaid, okay, his adopted son, and it's his own cousin that they knew when they were young, before the hijab, etc., and that he, according to this narration, that he ﷺ was affected by her beauty, and because of this, ta'ajjab, like he's impressed or something, and that was part of the story in terms of him wanting to marry her or something like this. And one of the things we have to remember with two genres in specific in our tradition is with seerah and tafsir. With seerah and tafsir, the goal of the authors was not necessarily to sort out the wheat from the chaff, to sort out the sahih from the fasid, to sort out what's correct and authentic versus what's fabricated or of extremely weak sanad. So they did what's called jama'. Their motivation when writing these books, the early seerahs and the early tafsirs, was just to gather, put everything that they could find. Anyone said it, just put it in. Okay? And unfortunately, some of the later mufassirin, when they're writing summations or summarized versions of early tafsir, they don't do so with the keen eye of distinguishing. And so even later tafsirs that are read by people, you'll find strange narrations that the ulama of what's called tahqiq, which is to sort out, tahqiq, to get to the bottom of it, to get to the haqq, right? The ulama of tahqiq, those that actually really investigate the matter and reach sound conclusions based off of both chains of narration, so historical, evidence and transmission, as well as theological foundations. What is our beliefs about Allah? What are our beliefs about the Prophets, alayhimus salam? That those are the ones that they will do that. They will sift the wheat from the chaff, and so one has to realize this when reading those early texts. Okay, so if you pick up an early book of Sirah and just read through it, and you can find all sorts of things that are problematic, very problematic, and that we don't necessarily believe that our Prophet did those things or that the Sahaba did those things. And the ulama are those that, the later ulama of tahqiq are the ones that sort it out. Because early historian, they're just trying to preserve whatever's there, and they know that that the later people will sort these things out. They're just trying to do jama', just to preserve everything. And the same thing with tafsir, which surprises a lot of people, is that tafsir, you think, oh, it's in Tabari, for example. Tabari's tafsir, Tabari, a mujtahid imam, certain at the level of Shafi'i and Abu Hanifa in jurisprudence, a major scholar of hadith. Certainly, Imam Tabari, if he puts in his tafsir, it must be, no, Imam Tabari's goal in his tafsir was not necessary. It wasn't like Imam Bukhari's goal with his hadith collection. He had a completely different approach or aim in his tafsir. So just because something is in Tabari's tafsir or even later codifications or summations, later summations of those early tafsirs, it takes the ulama to sort it out. So, regarding this, for example, one of our beliefs about all prophets is isma. One of our beliefs about all prophets is infallibility, that they do not commit anything, not only haram or makruh, but even khilaf al-awla. They do nothing that's unlawful, nothing that's reprehensible or disliked by the sacred law, and nothing that's even, suboptimal. Khilaf al-awla. They don't even do what's suboptimal. This is a point of aqidah. And so, how could the Prophet ﷺ, and I wanted to read from Sheikh Muhammad Al-Alawi, Ibn Al-Alawi Al-Makki, rahimahullah, in his book Insan Kamil, when he discusses this matter. He says, فَقَدْ أَخْطَأَ بَعْضُ الْمُفَسِّرِينَ فِي تَفْسِيرِهَا. Some of the mufassirin, they made mistakes in their tafsir, and they said that the meaning of the verse, okay, is that the Prophet ﷺ, when he saw Zainab, he was amazed, ajabathu, that he was impressed, and that he desired that Zaid divorce her. This is how some mufassirin interpreted based off of those narrations. And so that when Allah says, وَتُخْفِي فِي نَفْسِكَ مَا اللَّهُ مُبْدِي وَتَخْشَى النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ أَحَقُّ أَن تَخْشَى, that you hide in yourself what Allah would reveal, and that you fear people or you're shy around people, and Allah has more right that you fear or be shyful in front of, that he hid in himself this desire after seeing her, and that he only commanded Zayd to keep her as mujamala, just like courtesy, or not this civil sort of civility. And so he says that if this were true, this would be extremely problematic and completely unbecoming to the one who would not extend his two eyes towards the delights of this world. Allah Ta'ala commands in Surah Kahf, do not extend your two eyes to the adornments of this life. And this would be a direct contradiction. and that this would be the very hasad that's blameworthy that he himself ﷺ was so displeased with, is to desire something that someone else has for yourself, and that they lose that in the process, and that even atqiya, even people of taqwa are far above such a trait. So what about prophets? Imam Qushayri says this is a very bold and unfitting statement of whoever said it, and it shows the lack of realization of the right and virtue of the Prophet ﷺ. How could it be said that the Prophet ﷺ saw her and was impressed by her, while she was his cousin, and he used to see her ever since she was born, because in their childhood the women were not wearing the hijab. And then he's the one that had her marry Zaid. He's the one that conducted the marriage, and she listened to his wish. She was reluctant, but out of obedience to the Prophet ﷺ, she conceded. He's the one that did the marriage. And so had he wanted her for himself, ﷺ, he would have from the get-go preferred her to marry him instead of Zaid, and she would have been delighted by that. That would have been her dream come true, because she was of that noble clan like the Prophet ﷺ. And so and she only married Zaid out of obedience to him. And so the truth that we want to meet Allah with is that, this is Shaykh Muhammad ibn Alawi rahimahullah, the truth that we want to meet Allah with is that Allah Ta'ala is the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had informed the Prophet ﷺ that Zainab would eventually be his wife. Okay, this is the secret that the Prophet ﷺ kept hidden, that Allah would reveal, is the knowledge that she would eventually be his wife sallallahu alaihi wasallam after Zaid. Okay, and what was the reason? لِحِكْمَةٍ تَشْرِعِيَّةٍ, for a legislative wisdom. That Allah Ta'ala directly says, we married her to you لِكَيْ لَا يَكُونَ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ حَرَجٌ عَلَى أَدْعِيَائِهِمْ, so that there is no sin or blame for a man to marry his adopted son's former wife. And so the ayah itself alludes to this. And Zayd used to complain often to the Prophet ﷺ that he was not happy or comfortable with this marriage because of the multiple differences that were between them that caused a type of lack of harmony. And that every time the Prophet Zayd complained to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, keep your wife and fear Allah. So he was hiding in himself ﷺ the knowledge that eventually Allah, after Zayd would divorce her, that eventually Allah would marry Zainab to the Prophet ﷺ for this legislative benefit. Okay, this is what he was hiding. And what's the proof? Allah says, you were hiding in yourself what Allah would reveal. What did Allah make manifest to the community? It was not some sort of scandal or something that Allah made manifest. What did Allah make manifest? The marriage. So that's clearly what was. Allah says you were hiding something that Allah would reveal. And so it couldn't have been this type of strange occurrence that he found her beautiful and had some sort of infatuation. Hasha, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rather, the proof is that it has to be something that was revealed to the community. What was brought forth to the community? That he married her. So that was what he knew. That's what he was keeping to himself, keeping inside. And so he just the knowledge that Allah would marry her, and so that this. And so, in fact, this is actually tamamul adab wa dhawq. This is actually the epitome of etiquette and decency on his part, and the epitome of concern for other people's feelings. You see, Allah Ta'ala, when Allah says that you hid in yourself what Allah would reveal, it's actually a praise of the Prophet ﷺ. Because he's keeping it hidden because it would hurt Zayd's feelings. So he says, keep your wife to yourself and fear Allah, knowing that eventually Allah would reveal this matter. Had he said from the get-go that Zainab would eventually be my wife after you, this would have been a type of haraj, a discomfort. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises the Prophet with this trait in this ayah by saying, you hid in yourself what Allah would reveal. And this is supported by what Zuhri narrates, great scholar, narrator of hadith. He's in the chains of Bukhari, that Jibreel alayhi salam, nazala Jibreel ala Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, yu'allimuhu أن الله يزوجه زينب بنت جحش فذلك الذي أخفى في نفسه. Okay, so Imam Zuhri himself says that Jibreel alayhi salam came down to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, informing him that Allah would marry him to Zainab bint Jahsh, and that's what he kept hidden. And that's the thing that he kept hidden. And that in addition, Allah Ta'ala says, وَكَانَ أَمْرُ اللَّهِ مَفْعُولًا, that the end of the ayah, that the matter of Allah must come to pass, i.e. there's no way out, you shall marry her. And so, and then he mentions this point again, that Allah did not reveal to the community anything else other than that. And so it shows that that's the thing he was keeping hidden. And of course, the wisdom, which we discussed, the wisdom in this marriage was to remove the sanctity of tabanni, to the consideration of tabanni, of adoption, as if it's one's own lineage, and to nullify this practice. And we know the history that we discussed. And Allah Himself, subhanahu wa ta'ala, reveals, مَا كَانَ مُحَمَّدٌ أَبَا أَحَدٍ مِّن رِجَالِكُمْ. Muhammad is not the father of any of the men amongst you. So why then the Prophet ﷺ would tell Zayd to keep her is that Allah Ta'ala had not yet revealed when all of this would take place. The Zayd's divorce and the marriage of and the Prophet's marriage to Zainab. And so because the idhn had not yet come, the permission had not yet come, and so he says, no, keep your wife, i.e. until the time where the decree would come to pass, where Allah would make manifest. And then what's the meaning then that وَتَخْشَى النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ أَحَقُّ أَن تَخْشَى, that you, quote unquote, feared people while Allah has more right that you fear, is that khashya in this context is not fear but istihya, feeling shy. And that he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would feel shy that people would say he married the wife of his own son. And so and also from the calumny of the enemies, the calumny that would start from the hypocrites and the enemies of Islam. And so, and that what they would say, they would then, tell the believers this, and it could cause confusion for the believers. And so Allah Ta'ala informs him that don't even think about them. That wallahu ahaqqu an takhsha, don't even think about people. And that let Allah run this affair, let it take its course. No. And so this is very important. So based both off of the narration, it's really a baseless narration, and then on top of that, in addition to that, in terms of the from our understanding of theology and the necessary traits of prophets, as well as the context of the verse, the wording of the verse is very clear that this sort of, that this his being infatuated in any way while she was the wife of Zayd is baseless and impossible. Naam, so that's Zainab bint Jahsh, Allah be pleased with her, and she becomes our mother, one of the mothers of the believers. And as the text says, she dies in the Khilafat of Sayyidina Umar after the opening of Egypt, and she was about 53 at the time. Allah be pleased with her. And the text says that she was the Atwal Nisa'ihi Yadan, that she had the longest hand of the wives, And this is a reference to hadith. And the Prophet ﷺ, before he passed, he said, "Asra'u kunna lihaqin bi, atwalu kunna yadan." That the quickest of you all, speaking to the wives, the quickest of you all to meet me after my passing will be the one whose hand is longest. And so then they used to measure their hands. When they would get together, they used to put their hands on the walls and see whose hands were longest. And Zainab's was her hand was a little shorter than others, but she ended up dying first amongst the the wives, and so they realized it was a kinaya, it was an allegory or metaphor for being the most generous. Atwal yad is the one that does the most sadaqah, the most charity. Tul al-yad means that. So our mother Aisha, she says in Sahih Hadith in Muslim that regarding Zainab, كانت زينب هي التي تساميني من أزواج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في المنزل عنده. It was Zainab Bint Jahsh who used to vie with me in amongst the wives of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم in being, manzila عنده, like closest to him or the best in his eyes. ولم تكن امرأة خيرا منها في الدين. And there was no woman better in her than her religious practice, وَأَتْقَى لِلَّهِ, and nor in taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَأَصْدَقْ حَدِيثًا, and nor in being more truthful in speech, وَأَوْصَلْ لِلرَّحِمِ, nor in being most adhering to, maintaining kinship bonds and family ties, وَأَعْظَمْ صَدَقَةً, and the greatest in sadaqah, وَأَشَدْ ابْتِذَالًا لِنَفْسِهَا فِي الْعَمَلِ الَّذِي تَتَصَدَّقْ بِهِ وَيُقَرِّبْ ilallah, and nor putting the most effort in upon herself in terms of spiritual works by which she could give charity and donate and draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So very, very virtuous and attested to by our mother Aisha, Allah be pleased with them all. So again, there's two wives named Zainab. Right. Last week we ended with Zainab bint Khuza'ah, who's called Masakin, the mother of the poor, because before Islam even, she was so generous to poor people, she was called their mother. And then there's Zainab bint Jahsh, who we just discussed today, and also, interesting enough, she was the most charitable to the poor, that she had the quote-unquote longest hand. And so just to keep that in mind. And the first Zainab, Masakin, she only lived 2 to 3 months after getting married to the Prophet ﷺ, and so she and Khadija are the only ones who died before the Prophet ﷺ, the only wives who died before the Prophet ﷺ, while the rest lived on afterwards. And so then he continues in the text, line 116. وهند هي كم لها من فضلي تزوجت من بعد موت البعلي خير الورى وفي خلافة يزيد في عام 60 قضت بلا مزيد وبالبقيء دفنت وهاجرا 2 في أول من قد هاجرا. No, 3 lines. Next there is Hind, which is Salama. And what a virtuous woman. She also married after her spouse died. So we know that all of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ were widows, or they had been previously married. All of them had been previously married when they married the Prophet ﷺ, except for our mother Aisha. So Salama or Hind, she also married after her spouse died, who is Abu Salama, the best of creation. During the caliphate of Yazid, in the 60th year, she passed away when no time was left. In Baqi' she was buried. She and her previous spouse also migrated twice, among the first of those who migrated. So Salama, very important in the seerah, and she's very active in the seerah. She is Salama bint Abi Umayya, and she's from Bani Makhzum. Okay, Banu Makhzum, of course, are the main enemies of the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims throughout the seerah, right? Abu Jahl is from them, and Walid ibn Mughira and others, and Khalid ibn Walid, of course, who becomes Muslim eventually. But Banu Makhzum, so Salama is from Banu Makhzum, and then her husband, so she was married to Abu Salama ibn Abdul Asad al-Makhzumi. He was also Makhzumi. And Abu Salama was in fact the brother of the Prophet ﷺ through Rada'ah, through nursing. And he was also the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ, the son of the Prophet's aunt, Barra bint Abdul Muttalib. Okay, so the Prophet's aunt, Barra, the daughter of Abdul Muttalib, is the mother of Abu Salama. And both Abu Salama and Salama went on the migration to Abyssinia. Okay, when Sayyidina Ja'far went and to the Najashi, the famous story, and Sayyidina Ja'far spoke on behalf of the Muslims to the Najashi and recited Surah Maryam, the Abu Salama, Salama were both on that journey. In fact, many of the narrations of that are from Salama. So she relates several ahadith, several hundred hadith. Now, after the annulment of the ban, which we discussed a few weeks ago, that the rumors of that went to Abyssinia. They spread to Abyssinia, and so the Muslims there heard of it. So many Muslims returned to Mecca because they heard that the ban was annulled, and these rumors got exaggerated. So they thought that the hostilities had lessened and things were okay now in Mecca. And so they came back, and amongst them, those that came back, not all of them, but amongst those that came back from Abyssinia were Abu Salama and Salama. But when they returned, they saw that, of course, the annulment, the ban had been annulled, but the hostilities were still there. So they needed tribal protection. And of course, Banu Makhzum, they're the most hostile enemies to the Muslims. So they were facing much potential harm. So Abu Talib gives them protection. Abu Talib gives them protection. And it was culturally viable because Abu Salama is his nephew. Okay, through Barra. Barra is the sister of Abu Talib. And so they're both children of Abdul Muttalib. And so normally one goes with the father, okay, for the tribe. The tribe is it's a patriarchal system. But he said, what's the difference between my nephew, the son of my brother, versus the son of my sister? And so the Makhzumis acknowledged his protection. So Abu Talib gave them protection. Then later, when it was time for the Hijrah, so that's the first, because the text says they made 2 Hijrahs. One was to Abyssinia, then they came back to Mecca. Now at the time of the Hijrah to Medina, they also make Hijrah. And Abu Salama, Salama, and their son, their 2-year-old son, Salama, head out for the Hijrah. And they kind of sneak out because they know the Banu Makhzum are going to give them a hard time if they see them. But rumors had spread, and so Banu al-Maghira, which is one branch of Banu Makhzum, the branch that Salama is in, okay, not Abu Salama. So there are different branches under Banu Makhzum. And so Abu Salama is from one branch, Salama is from another called Banu al-Maghira. Banu al-Maghira comes out, some of them come out, several men, and they're awaiting them as they're trying to leave. And they say, you're not going anywhere with Salama. She's ours. And Abu Salama is helpless. He's not able to stop them. There's too many. So he leaves for his hijrah, and they keep back Salama and the baby boy, Salama. Now, the baby boy, it's a patriarchal system, so he is part of the branch of Abu Salama. And so that branch of Banu Makhzum comes and says, we need our boy. And so then she's separated from her son Salama. They take the little boy. And she's basically imprisoned by these Banu Maghira, and for up to a year. This is the situation for up to a year. And they said that every day she was crying. Every single day she was weeping. Allah be pleased with her. And so then finally, after all that time and seeing the state of this poor mother and the little baby without the parents, they finally feel pity. Okay, they finally feel pity. There's only so much animosity one can have for a religion, and eventually their humanity kicks in, and so they say, you can go ahead. So she reunites with Salama, and she sets off for her hijrah, and she goes alone. And women at that time did not travel the desert alone, and so she really didn't even know where she was going. She just left Mecca and started walking, and after some time, a few miles out, she's basically lost, not sure what to do. And this man, Uthman Ibn Talha, finds her. Uthman Ibn Talha, he's from Abd Dar, the clan of Mus'ab ibn Umair. and he's mushrik at the time. He's a non-Muslim. And he says, what's going on? And she says the situation and that her husband is already in Yathrib. And he says, I'll take you. And he basically walks the whole journey, has her ride on his animal and walks the whole journey and takes them all the way. And as they reach outside of Quba, he says, your husband is there. Ahlan wa sahlan, and he leaves them and goes back to Makkah. All just as a chivalrous act for someone of no tribal relation and opposite religions. He's still mushrik at the time. And she used to praise Uthman Ibn Talha for years after that. What a great and man that he was, and the service that he did. Uthman Ibn Talha, he's the one who eventually becomes Muslim, and he has the keys of the Kaaba. He's the one that after Fath Makkah, when the Prophet ﷺ says that because Abdullah always had the keys of the Kaaba from Jahiliyyah too, and so he says that you shall keep it till Yawm al-Qiyamah. So Uthman ibn Talha gets the keys of the Kaaba after Fath Makkah, and to this day it's his descendants that have the keys to the Kaaba, that even the authorities now, they let them have it as an honor, even though they don't have a political say in matters, but they get to open the Kaaba. And Uthman ibn Talha, he was a close friend of Khalid ibn Walid. They were like really close buddies. So after, the way they became Muslim, after the Umratul Qada, the makeup Umrah a year after Hudaybiyah, because at Hudaybiyah, the terms were that you can't make Umrah this year, you have to come back next year. So after that Umrah, and Islam was really doing well, and many people were entering Islam, and a lot of victories, and so the Quraysh were kind of seeing this thing unfold, and Khalid for years had been thinking about it, but he was reluctant. He didn't want to let go, and but his heart was turning. He said almost despite himself, he couldn't help finding a sort of appreciation and admiration for the Prophet ﷺ, even though he's trying to fight it. And so eventually after Umrat al-Qada, and it was just so manifest that how well Islam is doing, even he said that, when we went for Khandaq, the way it just turned around against us, he clearly could tell that the divine providence was there with the Prophet ﷺ. It was just so clear to him as a master military general, and how things just kept on turning against them. So he's finally, after that Umrat al-Qada, he says it's time, and so he goes to Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl and others, and they're not interested yet. So he's kind of confused, and he really wanted a friend to go with to Medina to do his Islam, but he couldn't find anyone. So as he's riding out, Uthman ibn Talha is there riding out too, and they're good friends from the old days. So they're both quiet, and they both have kind of the same thing on their minds. So Uthman ibn Talha is also, he's thinking the same thing, but they're quiet. And so after a while, Sayyidina Khalid makes a statement. He says, our situation is no different than a fox under the earth. If you put enough water, eventually it'll come out. It's trying to hide, trying to avoid it, but if you just flood it out, it'll eventually be forced. You're about to go under. You have to leave. And so Uthman, he understood what he meant, and they basically said, let's go do this. And so they go together and give their Islam to the Prophet ﷺ in Medina. So that's Uthman ibn Talha, is amazing, amazing man. Allah be pleased with them all. And so Abu Salama, okay, so then after the Hijrah, Salama reunites with her husband, and Salama is there. And so they're together. It's a beautiful marriage. They're very close to each other. Abu Salama and Salama are very close to each other. And they, in fact, said that if one of us dies, we're not going to remarry, because they were so, they couldn't think of anyone better than each other. And so Abu Salama, he's wounded at Uhud. And a few weeks after Uhud, he dies of those wounds. Allah be pleased with him. And so he made dua actually before he died that, oh Allah, grant her a better husband. And she realized that because he was giving ishara that pact we're not going to stick with it. He wanted her to get married again. And she used to say, I don't understand how I could find a better husband than Abu Salama. And lo and behold, 4 months after his death, after her iddah was up, the Prophet ﷺ proposes to her. And she realizes that Abu Salama's dua was answered, that Allah would find a better husband than even Abu Salama. And so, but she's reluctant. She's reluctant, and so she tells the Prophet ﷺ that she's reluctant. He says, why? And she gives him 3 reasons. She says, firstly, my age. I'm past my best years, as a wife. And she was actually only like 29 or 30 years old, but in Arab culture, it was past her, in her mind. And he says, okay, what's the second reason? She says, second reason is I'm very jealous, and mashallah, you have these other wives, and I'm gonna want you all for myself. And he says, what's the third reason? She says, the third reason is I have orphan children. She had 4 orphan kids by that time. And so then the Prophet says, as for your age, I'm older than you. So that's not an issue. He says, as for your jealousy, I will make dua that Allah remove it from your heart. Right? And this is the positive jealousy we discussed. It's not the blameworthy one, but just wanting something good for yourself. It's a ghaira. It's not hasad, it's a ghaira. But even that, he said, I'll make dua that Allah remove it. He said, as for the third, your orphan children, Allah and His Messenger shall take care of them. Allah and His Messenger shall take care of them. And so she agreed, and subhanAllah, became our mother. Bismillah. Naam. So that's Salama. Now Salama, they describe her in the biographies. كانت موصوفة بالجمال البارع والعقل البالغ والرأي الصائب. That she was described as having incredible beauty, piercing intellect, and sound judgment. Okay, incredible beauty, piercing intellect, and sound judgment. And it really her piercing intellect and sound judgment really manifests at Hudaybiyah. Okay, at Hudaybiyah, because she's the one who's with the Prophet ﷺ, and as we know that the Sahaba were in utter shock at what was happening. They felt that Islam has the izzah always, and Islam should never compromise, especially to tyrants that were attacking Islam this whole time, and they felt they could take on the Quraysh. They weren't, and so when the Prophet ﷺ is doing the treaty, he makes all these concessions and agrees to whatever they ask for, and he chooses the way of peaceful negotiation as a way of ending the violence, ending all of this, and of course we know Bismillah, that probably the most shocking for them is that they couldn't make Umrah that year. Remember, they went out they were not donning any armor, they were not going for battle, they were in the ihram, they went out strictly for the Umrah, and this was the first time they could go. They had their hopes set in this. Incredible disappointment that they couldn't go that year, and they felt for no valid reason, no real reason, and so that alone was difficult. But on top of that, if anyone of the Quraysh made it to Medina, if any Muslim of Makkah made it to Medina, they'd have to return them. But if anyone from Medina went to Makkah, they could keep them. And even the wording of the treaty that they couldn't write Rasulullah, they had to scratch that out. They couldn't write Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The Quraysh said, change it to Bismika Allahumma, in the name of Allah, in your name, O Allah, rather than in the name of Allah, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, because the Quraysh were not familiar with the name Ar-Rahman. They said, what is this name? And so all of these compromises. So then finally when it was done, and the Prophet ﷺ told them, go ahead and shave your heads and sacrifice your animals, okay, which is done post-Umrah. And so the Sahaba basically are standing there confused. Okay, it's not a matter of disobedience, but they're literally genuinely perplexed. So the best of creation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he feels bad that why aren't they listening to me? So he goes back to the tent, and who is there? Salama. And so she sees that he's a bit distraught, and she says, "What's wrong?" And he tells her, and she says, now this is her piercing intellect and sound judgment. She says, "Go ahead, and you shave your hair, and your head, and you sacrifice your animal, and they won't hesitate in following you." And so the Prophet ﷺ goes out and does that, and lo and behold, they jump with so much fervor to just emulate him that Umm Salama said, I was scared they're going to cut each other. With the quickness they were in shaving each other's heads, she feared that they would, and they were, of course, fighting for the hair, and they did it, and so, because you have to remember, this is like shattering their cognitive compartments of what was informed from their cultures. That this is done post Umrah. Like it doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to them to do it. But when the best of creation started doing it, they, of course, this is a point to pause on. Is that we have to remember whenever the Prophet ﷺ does anything, the Sahaba don't kind of wait to see how it's going to unfold. This is really, really important, okay? The Sahaba they're not sort of, let's see how this plays out. It doesn't make sense to me right now. I'm going to kind of just wait it out. See, the moment he does something, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they emulate with fervor, enthusiasm, and immediacy, okay? And this happens time and time again, like with the wudu and with the prayer and with the shaving of the head and the sacrifice. And our theologians will mention this when they're discussing the proof of prophetic infallibility. Okay, what's the proof that prophets cannot sin? That on one hand, Allah Ta'ala commands them to do good and to avoid sin. Okay, and so they're commanded to obey Allah. And on top of that, the people are commanded to obey the messengers. The people are commanded to obey the messengers. So if a messenger were to commit a sin, then the people are commanded to what? Copy the messenger. So what would they all do? They would all do that sin. And they will highlight, the theologians will highlight, is that you have to keep in mind the fervor and immediacy with their implementation of prophetic action. Is that immediately they jump into it wholeheartedly, without hesitation. And so if a prophet could sin, because someone could say, well, they'll make their tawbah though, and Allah will correct them. Well, you'll have hundreds, if not 1,000 people immediately falling into a sin as well, and then they all have to work it out through their tawbah. And then every time, and so you would have an entire ummah slipping and falling and slipping, and then they would get confused, is that, okay, maybe let's not, after 2-3 times, maybe we shouldn't emulate him as fast because prophets can sin. So let's see how this plays out. Make sure that they're not doing something wrong this time. God corrects them or not. Okay, this time God didn't correct them. It's a valid act of worship. Now we'll do it. No, it doesn't make any sense. That rather, prophets never sin. And everything they do is perfectly in perfect harmony with the divine command. And that's why they would jump into it so fast, because they knew there's no reason for lag time. Sami'na wa ata'na, labbaik, at your service. This is something, and the example at Hudaybiyah is a very salient example of this. And so this was the nasiha of Salama at Hudaybiyah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in fact sent a wind, and that hair and the sacrifice, it actually went into the haram, and they took an ishara that Allah accepted their intention. Allah accepted their intention of the Umrah. Bismillah. And speaking of the blessed hair of the Prophet ﷺ, Salama used to keep some. Salama used to keep some. In the Sahih Hadith, she used to dip it in water, and it was like she had like a hospital. People treat people for illness, and people would drink that and get better. The Tabarruk, the taking blessings from the prophetic traces and relics, this is something that occurs time and time again. There's a proof even in the Quran of taking blessings from prophetic relics, because Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, when he didn't have full blindness, but he had haziness in his eyes from all the tears. And so what did he do with which Allah returned the eyesight? Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, what did he take? What did he wipe his eyes with? But then he could see clearly. The shirt of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. The shirt of Prophet Yusuf, his son, who was a prophet. And so he did tabarruk, he took the blessings of the relic, something that touched the body of a prophet, and Allah, he came back, he could see fully. The haziness was gone. So, Naam. So, alhamdulillah. وَمِن نِسَاءِ الْمُصْطَفَى جُوَيْرِيَّةٌ. Line 119. ومن نساء المصطفى جويرية توفيت في عام نو لتدرية وقد سباها في غزاة المصطلق من بعلها مسافع بالمندلق ودفع النجوم لابن قيس عنها فما أبركها من عرس إذ أرسل الناس السبايا طرا لما غدا المستلقي سهرا للمصطفى عليه من رب الأنام وآله أزكى الصلاة والسلام. So the next mother that we'll discuss, Allah be pleased with them all, is Juwaidiyyah Bint Al-Haarith. Juwaidiyyah Bint Al-Haarith from Bani Mustahlik. Bani Mustahlik of Khuza'ah. Okay, she's the daughter of Al-Haarith, who was the Sayyid. Al-Haarith was the Sayyid of Bani Mustahlik. He was the head of the tribe of Mustahlik and the clan of Mustahlik, and they were from the tribe of Khuza'ah. Khuza'ah, which we said that they come up over and over in the Sirah. And we'll just translate the lines first. That included among the women of the chosen one is Juwaidiyyah. She died in the year 56, so you should know. Initially, she was taken as a concubine after the battle of Al-Mustahlik from her husband Musafir, who died later by the sword. So the Prophet ﷺ paid Ibn Qais, who held her, for her manumission, and then married her himself, and what a blessed bride she was. For all the Muslims freed their captives from her clan when they realized the entire Mustahliqi clan were now the in-laws of the Chosen One, upon him from the Lord of creation and his family the purest blessings and peace. So, Bani al-Mustahlik, this was the expedition. So Khuza'ah, but Bani al-Mustahlik was part of Khuza'ah, and they were closer to the Red Sea on the western coast. And Bani al-Mustahlik, most of Khuza'ah were actually, on friendly terms with Medina. They were on friendly terms with Medina. And in fact, it's Khuza'ah they're the allies with the Muslims, and Banu Bakr are the allies with Quraysh in terms of the Hudaybiyah agreement. If you recall, Hudaybiyah was a ceasing of all fighting, including allies. So Banu Khuza'ah is with the Muslims, and Banu Bakr are with the Quraysh. And Banu Bakr and Khuza'ah had been fighting amongst themselves as well before Hudaybiyah. So after Hudaybiyah, not only the fighting has to stop between Quraysh and the Muslims, but also between Banu Bakr and Banu Khuza'ah. And that's how the armistice was breached, is that Banu Bakr one night, after Hudaybiyah, when it was broken, that they raided Khuza'ah. Banu Bakr raided Khuza'ah, and in fact, some of the Quraysh helped with weapons, and in fact might have took part in the skirmishes, and a few people of Khuza'ah died. So Banu Khuza'ah then went back to the Prophet ﷺ and informed him of what happened, and it might come up when we discuss Habiba. But in any case, so most of Khuza'ah were allied, but Banu Mustahlik specifically of Khuza'ah, they were against the Muslims. Okay, so amongst Banu Khuza'ah, Banu Mustahlik were with Quraysh, as opposed to the rest of Banu Khuza'ah. And so Quraysh, they reached out to Banu Mustahlik to raid Medina. They said that, why don't you raid from the west, and it'll cause problems for Medina. Well, rumors spread amongst Khuza'ah that Banu Mustahlik, one of the clan amongst Khuza'ah, was planning this, and Khuza'ah, most of them were on friendly terms, and so they sent word to the Prophet ﷺ in Medina, and so the Prophet ﷺ wants to preempt their attack, and so he gathers Sahaba, and they go out to take on Banu Mustahlik before they even have a chance to raid Medina, and they arrive. The Muslims arrive there at least a week before Banu Mustahlik even head out for Medina. And this was the expedition that on the way back, our mother Aisha, her necklace broke, and the story of the Ifk took place. Okay, this is the same expedition on the way back that the story of the fabrication took place with our mother Aisha, Allah be pleased with her. So that, but what happened with Banu Mustahlik is basically there was not much of a fight, because the Muslims came and they basically gave up. Less than 10 people died. Amongst the 10 that died on the side of Banu Mustahlik was the husband of Juwaidiyyah. The husband of Juwaidiyyah, who's the daughter of Al-Haarith, their head. Okay, she's the daughter of Al-Haarith, the head of Banu Mustahlik. So they are all taken as captives, okay, and there's 500-600 of them that are taken as captives by the Muslims, and including Juwaidiyyah. And so Juwaidiyyah, Allah be pleased with her, that she is taken by Ibn Qais. So Thabit Ibn Qais. Thabit Ibn Qais is an Ansari. So she falls in his division of the spoils. Thabit ibn Qais ibn Shammas al-Ansari al-Khazraji, and he was actually called Khatib al-Ansar. He was like an eloquent speaker amongst the Ansar. The Prophet ﷺ, in one narration, Basharahu bil Jannah, he gave him glad tidings of paradise, which is a quick footnote we want to add. There are dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of Sahaba that the Prophet ﷺ told them glad tidings of paradise, either directly or indirectly to others while they were alive. Like sometimes he would say, Rahimahullah, about a companion that's still alive. He would say, Allah have mercy on him. And the Sahaba would feel sad when the Prophet would say that, because they knew that meant that he would be martyred soon. And that's a dua. When the Prophet would make that, it was an indication they would be martyred soon, and they'd be martyred. So then why do we say al-ashara al-mubashirin bil-jannah? Why do we say the 10 promised paradise? Well, because they were 10 eminent companions who were promised it in one hadith. Okay, there was one specific hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, Abu Bakr fil Jannah, wa Umar fil Jannah, wa Uthman fil Jannah, wa Ali fil Jannah, wa Zubair fil Jannah, wa Talha fil Jannah, ila akhiri, mentioning all 10 of the Ashar Mubashirin. So that they have a unique rank of being given the glad tidings, because it was mentioned all at once, and the reason they were mentioned all at once is because they are the 10 best of the Sahaba. Okay, so after the 4 Khulafa Rashideen, the next in the order of their Khilafah, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, that's also the order according to the dominant Sunni opinion of their ranks, is that the other 6 of the Ashar Mubashirin. That's why the hadith was mentioned in that way, because it's not only giving them glad tidings of paradise, but informing the ummah of the 10 best of the ummah. And then after them, the people of Badr, and then the people of Uhud, and the people of the Bayt al-Ridwan. This is the order of the Sahaba. So, but many others were given. So including, like Sayyidina Bilal, he was told that the Prophet said, I heard his footsteps in paradise. I heard the footsteps of Bilal in paradise, and dozens of others. So Thabit ibn Qais, he was told of his Jannah as well. And he was martyred at Yamama, at the Battle of Yamama. So he's the one, it's in his lot that Juwaidiyyah falls. So Juwaidiyyah, she's obviously a noble woman, daughter of the leader of Bani Mustahlik, and she goes to the Prophet ﷺ and tells him of her situation. She says, I'm the daughter of Al-Haarith, the leader of his people, and you see this tribulation that I am in. It's obvious to you. And Sayyidina Thabit ibn Qais, he put a ransom that was very, very high, a very expensive ransom for her. So the Prophet ﷺ says, so she says, can you help me out? He says, I'll do something better. Is that not only will I pay your ransom, but I will marry you if you so choose to accept. And so she says, I accept. So this important point is that there was no coercion here. She accepted on her own accord, okay? And she became Muslim. She took Shahada and became Muslim. And so this is what the line says, is that وَدَفَعَ النُّجُومَ لِابْنِ قَيْسٍ line 121. So the Prophet paid Ibn Qais, the nujum is the installments for the ransom, who held her for her manumission, and then married her himself, and what a blessed bride she was. Some narrations mention that Al-Haarith, in fact, her father, came to pay the ransom. And when he came, the Prophet said, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that she can choose between going back with you, or I pay it and she stays my wife, and she becomes my wife, and that I would marry her. And she chose to be the wife of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam rather than going back with Al-Haarith. And in other narration, it said that Al-Haarith, he got together the ransom, and he had these big camels, fine camels that he was going to give for the ransom. And on his way, right outside Medina in a valley, he looked at a couple of them, and they were just too precious to him. He couldn't let go. So he leaves them in that valley without telling anyone, and he takes the rest of them for the ransom. And so that when he arrives, according to this narration, Allah knows best, its strength, that the Prophet said, what about those two that you left in the valley of Aqiq? And he's like, how do you know? And the Prophet ﷺ gave details, exactly what went through, how he looked at them, kept them on the side, all the details. And according to that narration, Al-Haarith became Muslim. He took Shahada, and two of his sons followed him as well. And then, of course, Juwaidiyyah became Muslim. Now, when she becomes Muslim and the Prophet marries her, ﷺ, what's the status of those 500-600 captives? After the marriage, what are they in relation to the Prophet ﷺ? In-laws, right? Because they're all one family, it's a clan. And so all the Sahaba, what did they do when they realized? They all set them free. Is that we have the ashar, we have the in-laws of the best of creation with us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and so they released them all. And so Aisha, our mother, says, فَلَا أَعْلَمُ إِمْرَأَةً كَانَتْ أَعْظَمَ بَرَكَةً مِنْهَا عَلَى قَوْمِهَا. I knew of no woman who was more blessed, more barakah for her people than Juwaidiyyah. And that's why our author Imam Lamti says, فَمَا أَبْرَكَهَا مِنْ عِرْسٍ. Like what a source of blessing, barakah she was as a bride, right? As a bride. And so إِذْ أَرْسَلَ النَّاسُ السَّبَايَا طُرًّا, because the people let go of the captives طُرًّا, all at once. لما غدا المستلقي سهرا, when Mustaliqi became in-laws للمصطفى, of the chosen Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Line 124. ورملة بنت أبي سفيان تزوجت خير الورى وكان وليها خالدا أو عثمانا عند النجاشي كما أتانا فسلم المهر إليها أجمع من الدنانير 104 وعام 7 أهديت لأحمد وموتها في عام مد قد بدا. The next mother is Ramla, the daughter of Abu-Sufyan. Ramla, the daughter of Abu-Sufyan, who's better known as Habiba. better known as Habiba. She's the daughter of Abu-Sufyan ibn Harb, who in the Seerah is the main enemy of Islam, although not as vicious in his temperament or style like Abu Jahl or the others, but still, competing, vying, and eventually, of course, becomes Muslim. And his Hasuna Islamu, his Islam was valid, as well as his wife Hind. Also, she was more, perhaps had a more animosity to the Prophet ﷺ and Sahaba earlier on throughout the Seerah, but then, of course, she becomes Muslim as well. Hasuna Islamuha, her Islam is good as well. So they're companions. Allah be pleased with them both. And but of course, Habiba, she was married originally to UbaydAllah ibn Jahsh. UbaydAllah ibn Jahsh, okay, who is the brother of Zainab bint Jahsh, who we talked about today. Okay, so Zainab bint Jahsh, her brother is Abdullah ibn Jahsh and UbaydAllah ibn Jahsh. UbaydAllah ibn Jahsh is the first husband of Habiba. UbaydAllah ibn Jahsh, before Islam had become a Christian. He was a Christian. And then after Islam, he became Muslim. And then he and Habiba, they both became Muslim, and they went to Abyssinia. And they were amongst the Muslims that went to Abyssinia. But unfortunately, UbaydAllah ibn Jahsh, while in Abyssinia, returns to his Christianity. Okay, so he leaves Islam and becomes Christian, and then he dies. He dies there. And this is an important point because that's apostasy, but it occurred in non-Muslim lands, and so there was no legal ruling applied. Okay, so if the whole issue of apostasy, that in our codified fiqh tradition, in the pre-modern context, that the ruling for apostasy is it's a capital offense, but so putting aside its applicability today, that we're just considering the fiqh tradition in its pre-modern presentation, that only would apply in a Muslim land, that in a non-Muslim land, even in the codified fiqh tradition, it would not apply in a non-Muslim land. And so that's UbaydAllah ibn Jahsh is an example of that. So when he, after he dies as a Christian in Abyssinia, Habiba becomes widowed. And so she, and this is a few months before Hudaybiyah. Okay, just the timeline. UbaydAllah ibn Jahsh dies a few months before Hudaybiyah. So she was very distressed, and after her iddah, after a little over 4 months, the Prophet ﷺ sends a letter to Najashi asking him to be his representative and do the marriage between the Prophet ﷺ and Habiba. Okay, and so she had a dream also. Habiba had a dream where she was called Mother of the Believers, and that confirmed and so she was ready to do it. So she chooses Khalid ibn Sa'id, who is of her clan, to give her in marriage, and Najashi represents the Prophet ﷺ, and they do the marriage in Abyssinia. So that's why the line says that كان وليها خالدا أو عثمانا. So the Khalid there is Khalid ibn Sa'id, not Khalid ibn Walid, Khalid ibn Sa'id. And that's probably the stronger opinion. The other opinion that was Uthman ibn Affan doesn't really make sense because he wasn't in Abyssinia at the time. Okay, so Khalid ibn Sa'id. Khalid ibn Sa'id was one of the Sabiqeen. He was like the 4th or 5th to become Muslim. And he has a very interesting story. He had a dream too. Before he became Muslim, he had a dream that he was about to fall in like this unending inferno. And at the very beginning of Islam, before Prophet ﷺ even announced publicly that he's a prophet, he just had this dream, and that Al-Amin came and grabbed him with both hands and held him back. Al-Amin, the Prophet ﷺ, who they knew him as Al-Amin back then. So he goes, when he wakes up, who does he ask to interpret the dream? Who is the dream interpreter for the Quraysh? The man of wisdom, Sayyidina Abu Bakr. Sayyidina Abu Bakr, he goes to him to interpret the dream. And Abu Bakr, he was the best friend of the Prophet ﷺ, who had just received revelation, and he, of course, was the first man to become Muslim. And so he's like, this is what it means. And so Khalid ibn Sa'id early on becomes Muslim. And his father hated Islam, and he imprisoned him. He told him to leave it. He said, I won't leave it. So then he beat him ruthlessly, and he imprisoned him without food or drink. And for 3 days he was in that situation. And then he was able to escape after 3 days. And once he escaped, his father didn't try to catch him. He just disowned him. He said, you're not my son anymore. So he suffered a lot, Khalid ibn Sa'id, Allah be pleased with him. So in any case, he represents our mother Habiba, and they do the wedding, the marriage, and Najashi actually has a feast, a walima for them in the palace. And so the Prophet ﷺ sends the mahr as well, and that's referred to in the lines that 400 dinars as a mahr, and Khalid ibn Sa'id then gives it to her on his behalf, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, and then, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. وكم حوت من شرف صفية لما غدت لأكرم البرية زوجا وكانت سبيت في خيبر فاختارها لنفسه خير الورى وعتقها مهرا لها حقا جعل وعام 50 بها الموت نزل. And then the next one is Safiya bint Huyay. Safiya bint Huyay is the daughter of Huyay ibn Akhtab. Huyay ibn Akhtab of Banu Qurayza. So he was one of the heads of Banu Qurayza, the Jewish tribe in Yathrib. And he was actually well versed in the Torah, in the scriptures, he and his brother. So early on, when the Prophet ﷺ made the Hijjrah, Huyay, her father, Safiya's father, and her uncle, Huyay's brother, they went to Quba to check it out to see if this person claiming to be a prophet matched what was in their scriptures. And Safiya remembers, she was a little girl, she remembers that they came home very late that night and they were very distressed. And she listened into the conversation from behind the curtain, and they admit that he's a true prophet. They admit that to each other. But they're so distressed, and she was confused. Why are they distressed if they found the true prophet? And they basically vowed that they would oppose him. And this perplexed her even more. And so she, from a young age, grew up in her mind that he being a confirmation of what the Torah promised of the last prophet. This is how she grew up, and she believed it, because young children, they don't have this type of prejudice of you're from this clan or that clan, you're from this race or that race. It's truth is truth. And so she was very acceptable, amenable to the idea of an Arab prophet. In any case, then, after Khaybar, so she was about 17 years old, and after Khaybar, then when she's taken, so we'll translate these lines. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And what honor was gained by Safiya when she too became the noblest of creation's spouse. She had been captured as a concubine in Khaybar, and the best of creation chose her for himself. Her freedom was her dowry, a right he gave her. In the year 50, death descended and took her. Naam. So the Prophet ﷺ freed her and took her as his wife, and her dowry was her freedom. Her dowry was her freedom. So she was totally open, because as a young girl, again, she was convinced of his true prophethood. And she in fact had a dream shortly before Khaybar of the full moon being over Medina and then moving over Khaybar and landing in her lap. And when she woke up, she was married to Kinana, who was the head of Khaybar at the time. So she told her husband the dream, and he knew what it meant. And he slapped her in the face and said that, made a rude comment. And so Kinana is killed at Khaybar, and so then she remembered the dream. She remembered as a child what she heard, and so she was excited to be the wife. And then a quick, that one day the Prophet ﷺ, later when they were married, he entered into her presence and found her crying, and he says, what's making you cry? And she says, I'm hearing that Aisha and Hafsa are saying that, we're more dear to the Prophet ﷺ than Safiya. And it's kind of those bit of rivalry. And that and so he says, why don't you tell them that he said, Sallallahu, how can the two of them be better than me, be better than you? No, excuse me. Ala qulti, why don't you tell them, وَكَيْفَ تَكُونَانِ خَيْرًا مِنِي, how can you two be better than me? وَأَبِي هَارُونَ وَعَمِّي مُوسَى وَزَوْجِ مُحَمَّدٍ, how can you two be better than me when my father is Harun, because they were from the Aaronites, and my uncle is Moses, and my husband is Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And this, of course, cheered her up. And this is something that, again, a very practical lesson we can take from this hadith is that the Prophet ﷺ, every single situation, he would find the good in it. And he would turn people's outlooks to see the good in it. And so seeking the good in every situation, this prophetic optimism, tafa'ul, kana yu'jibuhu al-fa'ul, the Prophet ﷺ loved optimism, and he loved finding the good in the situation. This is a profound sunnah that we can implement in major and minor things. Everything in our lives, we can really strive to implement this, is that seeking the good, not being pessimistic, not not seeing things as bad. So this stems from having a good opinion of Allah, seeking and trying to find the good in the situation, and turning the situation such that it is pleasant, is from having a good opinion of Allah, because any good in the situation is from Allah. So when we're seeking the good, we're seeking Allah. When we're seeking the good in the situation, we're ultimately seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that situation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sometimes will veil the good in a situation as a test. He will show His jalal, He will show His majesty, and veil His, from our perspective, that we won't be able to see the jamal, the divine beauty. And so if we think well of Allah in the situation, we are seeking that veiled jamal. We're seeking that veiled beauty. And Allah will unveil it. If we think well of Him, He will show us that beauty. And every situation has divine beauty. This is something like the problem of evil, this Western theological problem of explaining how do we reconcile evil, suffering in the world with a good and just and all-powerful God, is that His goodness is sometimes veiled. And it's about seeking the goodness. It's about seeking that veil to be lifted. And ultimately that veil is lifted in the next life. Ultimately that veil is lifted in the next life. And so this is inshallah a good point to end on, is that optimism, and prophetic optimism, and having the best opinion of the giver of good, who might not always show it clearly as a test for us. And so we ask Allah to show us the good in every situation. Some questions here. Name change. What about changing last names after marriage for women? Can a husband force a wife to do it? So name changing in and of itself is fine, because it's not a shift of lineage. You're not saying that you're no longer the daughter of your father, right? So I don't know of a prohibition of that. Allah knows best. I don't know about forcing though, so I'd have to check. Is Salama the same as Salama? Yes. Salama is the same as Salama. The spelling is different. Which commentators of Qurrat al-Absar would you recommend? So, unfortunately, my books are still in Jordan, but the one that I have with me, Bughyat al-Abrar by Sheikh Muhammad al-Hasan ibn Ahmad al-Khaddim al-Yaqubi al-Shinqiti. Hafidhullah. That's what I'm using. What's the prophetic view on intercultural marriage? Is it encouraged or discouraged? So it's by no means Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Right. So it's not discouraged. Okay, it's not discouraged by any means. And in fact, both in the Sirah as well as practically, one can often note that when you have intercultural marriage, you have very uniquely gifted children that come from it. There's something you can note just from seeing that there's something about the admixture of different backgrounds that leads often to superior, very high intelligence and high, like a lot of talent. It's something you just see in the world. It's interesting to note. But that part of the breaking the jahiliyyah, right, of racism and classism and prejudice, that a very profound way of doing that is through intercultural marriage. And we should be spiritually mature enough to where we don't see race or culture as a barrier. We really need to rise above that. That the Prophet ﷺ, when he mentioned reasons for, what to look for in a spouse, he mentioned their religion and their just the family in terms of the family itself, not necessarily the culture of the family, like the race of the family, but the being from a good family, a decent family, and then wealth, and then beauty. And then he said that fadfar bidat ad-din, that but be victorious, really get your treasure with the pious person. So we should really look at piety and other aspects of practical life that will lead to a good marriage. But oftentimes a culture thing, it's remnant from what we would be like without Islam. It's sort of reflective of what we would be like without Islam. We should try to remove those tendencies from us. So Allah knows best. Yeah. Alhamdulillah. Any questions?
I've never heard about anything about Islam regulating.
Yeah. So that's a huge topic, but we can just say that maybe succinctly mention in terms of slavery is that, like you said, it was a system that was ubiquitous in the pre-modern world. Every culture and religion acknowledged it. We mentioned for polygamy last week, but in that context, that even many prophets in the Bible had concubines. It's something that the other religions will acknowledge. It was accepted, and what Islam did in general is it made it a lot harder it closed the doors of acquiring slaves, and it opened the doors of manumitting slaves. And so the reward of freeing a slave was considered, many hadith, dozens and dozens of hadith about the incredible reward of freeing a slave. And a slave in that world was very valuable. It's like very valuable property because it's labor. And so freeing a slave it's a financial sacrifice. It's a huge financial sacrifice in that pre-modern world. So when you read that so and so freed 100 slaves, you have to think of, like, if you translate it to our time, like the bank account, it's hundreds and thousands of dollars, or a lot of, and so that's something that Islam facilitated to the utmost degree, and that there's nothing in Islam to prevent that if human beings agreed to abolish this practice, such as the modern or postmodern world that we're in, that it has to be implemented in any way. That if human beings by convention can agree to not do it, then that's valid, and we should and abide by those rules. That would be something that is perfectly legitimate from an Islamic lens. And so, but one could argue that it would probably not even be feasible to completely abolish it at that time, just the nature of the world. And so, what was done was that the means of removing it were done to the maximal capacity in that context, and Allah knows best. So it's something that it's hard for us to. It doesn't square with our cultural paradigms, and so we just have to say, that's just the way things were. At some point, you just have to say that's just the way things were, and it's okay that they're not like that anymore. And the fact that, that's all I'll say, inshallah. Right. I think it's perfectly natural to find it perplexing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But again, it is something that, in and of itself, is not. So the question about polygamy, and the idea that, so just so I understand your question, could you just sort of summarize the exact question what you're asking?
I'm trying to understand why women of that, would enter into such.
Oh, why women would enter into polygamous situations?
Even at that time, right?
At that time.
Just
Again, it's a culture, it's an entire world we don't understand. And in that culture, obviously, it wasn't seen. I mean, not all women found it problematic, and it's not. Again, it's not unique to Islam. So, you had it amongst the Quraysh before Islam. That was just part of Arab culture. And like we tried to highlight last week, that you when you study ancient civilizations, we quoted one anthropologist who said that over 80% of all ancient cultures and civilizations in the pre-modern world had polygamy. It was just something everywhere. So women didn't necessarily feel an aversion to it. Like, they would willingly go into it because it was just part of culture. It was the way things were done. And some women might have found it was not a fully it was not a negative thing in their minds. And so it's something that it's very clear, the Quran mentions it, that the idea of taking up to 4 wives. And so we cannot see it as in and of itself intrinsically unethical, because it's polygamy was not prohibited, but it's just something that it's very foreign to our ethos. We just can't understand it. But again, at that time, it was, you had, how many fathers marrying their daughters off to a man already with 1 wife, both pre-Islam and post-Islam, and how many women willingly entering into such relationships. So it's just sort of a radical cultural difference, So there's a question about a particular hadith. I will look it up, inshallah. I don't have knowledge on that hadith. I'll do that for our final class. Will be on the 6th, December 6th, inshallah. And there's a couple questions from last class as well as this one from online. I'll look it up, inshallah. Yeah.
In line 110, it also mentions Jahsh. So I was wondering, which Ibn Jahsh was that?
I think it's Abdullah. Let me check. In line 110. Abdullah ibn Jahsh. Yeah, so line 110, Zainab al-Masakin, she was previously married to Abdullah ibn Jahsh, who was martyred at Uhud.
Is he related
he's the brother of UbaydAllah and Zainab Bint Jahsh. Yeah. Alhamdulillah. Anything else? Yeah, it's not boasting, but it's tahadduth bin ni'am shukr. Yeah, speaking of your blessings is a type of gratitude, and it's in the context of an opposite type of So, inshallah, we've gone past our time, and we'll meet in a couple weeks, 3 weeks, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad an nabiyul ummi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.